Orion, standing behind his sister, tipped the cake over, smearing frosting across my face so thickly I couldn't open my eyes. Come on, she was just joking. You're 30 now. Are you really holding a grudge against someone in her 20s? Do you think you're a princess who needs the world to revolve around her? He walked off with his friends, laughing and joking, leaving me to deal with the mess. Breaking up didn't seem like an option. At 30, who else would want me but him? That thought made my face go cold as I replied to my mom's message, agreeing to a blind date. Mom quickly arranged a time, then paused to ask, "Didn't you say you only wanted that tall guy?" I wiped the sticky frosting off my face and laughed at myself. We're over, Mom. You're right. Life isn't a storybook. We can move forward without anyone. On the phone, my mom sighed. You've always been so headstrong. Once you care about someone, you give everything. This must have been tough for you. Orion's too childish. Breaking up is better. I'll find someone your age, someone you can really talk to. She kept talking for a while before finally hanging up. I stood up and noticed a few bruises on my body. In the past, Orion would have panicked, rushing to grab a first aid kit and gently dabbing each spot with a cotton swab, blowing softly to ease the pain. Now, I stared at the open door as a cold breeze made me shiver. Before I could stand, Orion appeared, leaning against the doorframe. He stepped on some cake, nearly slipping, and his brow creased in irritation. What's going on here? The place is still a mess. Are you still upset with Celeste? I told you it was an accident. I looked at him, and his once familiar face seemed strange. I couldn't pinpoint when, but he stopped calling me Serafina and stopped making me his priority. Now a younger shadow called him brother, and his affection went to her, while I got the sharp remarks. I tried to fix things, but I only saw his frustration, a stark contrast to the happiness he showed Celeste. The sadness, disappointment, and anger weighed on me. The boy who once adored me had changed. Competing with someone new felt pointless. I stayed quiet. Orion's frown deepened. What does your silence mean? Are you giving me the cold shoulder? Fine, I'll apologize for her. Come on, Serafina, you're 30. Why are you bothering an 18-year-old? A wave of helplessness swept over me. Turning 30 felt like a milestone. I hadn't changed much, but they wouldn't let me forget. They kept forcing me to accept that I was 30, older now, and shouldn't act like a teenager. Fine, I'll go to my room and rest since I'm 30 and can't keep up with you youngsters. I turned to leave, but I heard heels click at the door. Serafina, I'm sorry. I didn't mean to be disrespectful. I've always thought of you as an elder, Celeste said, blinking with a look of innocence as she helped Orion to the living room. She reached for something behind her. Orion had a few drinks, so I brought him back. I just went to pick up a birthday gift for you. You're not mad, right? I took a closer look and saw a skimpy, sexy nightgown in the smallest size. Something I could never fit into. I scoffed. How thoughtful. Her eyes filled with tears. I'm so sorry, Serafina. These are just things we younger people like. I didn't think it would upset you. I glanced at Orion, who instinctively stepped back with Celeste. She was just trying to give you a gift. What's the big deal? Suddenly, I felt drained. I dropped the lingerie on the floor, feeling humiliated. I'm just not used to this kind of openness young people enjoy, I said, stressing the word. Orion looked uneasy. I didn't blame him. When we first met, he would blush from holding my hand, but now he seemed comfortable with Celeste's carefree attitude. I didn't have the energy to argue. I went to my room, took a shower, and fell into a deep sleep. When I woke up, Orion was by my bedside with a bowl of warm sweet potato porridge. He touched my forehead and sighed in relief. At least you don't have a fever. Are you still upset? That gift wasn't right. I'll get you a new one, okay? I looked at him, feeling lethargic. He leaned in to kiss me, but I turned away. Orion, you haven't called me Serafina in a long time. Do you really think I'm old now? His smile froze, and he stood there silently, unable to respond. I closed my eyes, exhaustion seeping in, my wounded heart long since numb. Serafina, let me explain, Orion started. Did I interrupt something? Celeste's shaky voice came from the doorway. But we have class today, and I've been waiting for a ride forever. Orion grabbed my wrist briefly, then let go. Don't worry, I'll drive you, he said. When I opened my eyes, I saw Celeste in the provocative nightgown she'd promised to give me, flashing a sly smile before quickly dropping her gaze to appear innocent as Orion looked over. Her figure was barely covered, and I saw Orion gulp. Serafina, I just borrowed it from Orion for a while. We'll return it soon. Since you dislike this outfit, I didn't want it to be wasted. I'm a broke student, after all. I didn't want to deal with her, so I shut my eyes again, but she seemed determined to keep pushing. If you don't forgive me, I won't be able to focus in class. Maybe I'll skip it. Before I could respond, Orion's voice turned icy. He walked back to the bed and pulled me out from under the covers. Serafina, there's mandatory attendance for Celesta's class. If she misses it, she'll fail. Why are you being so petty? She didn't do it on purpose. Besides, don't you have any guilt in this? You threw away her heartfelt gift. You owe her an apology. My head throbbed from lack of sleep, and his rough grip on my wrist hurt. My patience wore thin. Does her failing really have to be my fault? I snapped. Celeste started crying harder. If Serafina still blames me, I'll just leave you alone, she sobbed, grabbing a coat and rushing out in tears. Orion glared at me, his eyes cold. You know how important her grades are. If Celeste fails, it could mess up her graduation. Remember how you didn't want me to drop out when I was in college? How can you be okay with this now? Destroying someone's future is like destroying their life, and their parents' lives too. Don't be that kind of person. He turned and ran after Celeste, not sparing me another glance. I stood there, numb, watching him disappear. We met when Orion was 18, just as I finished grad school and he started college. Our first encounter was a fleeting glance in a crowd, and I never imagined we'd meet again. But that summer, he interned at my company and started chasing me. His young love was so sincere and passionate that it was impossible to ignore. Serafina, I fell for you the moment I saw you at your graduation, he once confessed. I avoided his eyes. It won't work. I'm 6 years older than you. If there's something you don't like about me, I'll change it, except my age. It's not fair to use that as an excuse, he insisted. Life's short. Why not give it a chance? I gathered what little courage I had left. 6 years passed. For the first 3, I was confident we'd grow old together. But, in the last 2 years, he began to drift away. My friends and family warned me the age gap was too big, that relationships like ours couldn't last. Still, I held on. In those early years, Orion promised we'd marry when I turned 30, and that he'd shield me from the world's judgment. I believed him. In the last 2 years, he stopped mentioning marriage, and I stopped asking. I kept waiting for my 30th birthday, but that day shattered my illusions, forcing me to face the truth. Suddenly, my phone lit up with a video call from Celeste. She ended the call quickly, then sent a video. In it, she leaned on Orion, her voice soft and sweet. Orion, do you like older or younger women? He tapped her nose and chuckled. Who would choose something old? The video cut off abruptly. I thought I'd reached the point where it wouldn't hurt, but I was wrong. Looking in the mirror, I noticed faint lines near my eyes. They weren't obvious, but they were there. I wasn't young anymore. In my 20s, even if I stayed up all night helping Orion study for his exams, I still had energy to work the next day. I touched my face as tears slipped from my eyes. The boy in my memories was still young, only 24, thriving academically and professionally. But I had aged. He could easily discard our shared memories. I once dreamed we'd go from school uniform to wedding attire, growing old together. In the end, it was a naive fantasy. At 18, Orion was devoted to me. At 24, he'd forgotten how we got here. I felt a wave of self-pity, thinking I was being overly dramatic. Just then, my mom's WeChat call came through again. Serafina, don't forget about the blind date. I found someone good for you. He even teaches at your old school. I sniffled and smiled weakly. Okay, I'll be there. I ended the call, and Orion's phone began ringing incessantly. I hit decline, but the calls continued. I figured it would be easier to talk things out directly. I picked up the call. Serafina, are you satisfied now? Celeste failed again, and she's threatening to jump off a building. But she also said it's not your fault and asked me not to blame you. Get to the school, apologize to her, and use your contacts to help her retake the classes. If anything bad happens to Celeste, it'll be on you. He's 24, but still incredibly childish. I was tired of dealing with this nonsense. Since my blind date was at the school, I figured I might as well go meet him. I had finally decided to end things with Orion and began packing my things. He had burned all the gifts he'd given me. It was ironic. Once Celeste entered his life, the gifts dwindled. In the first 3 years, even though Orion was a broke student, I paid for our dates. The presents he gave me were handmade, not worth much in money, but rich in meaning. Now he could afford the expensive gifts he once wished to buy, but he barely gave me anything, while Celeste was showered with presents. I had invested everything into a relationship that ultimately led nowhere. With my bags packed, I took a cab to the school. I messaged my date and wandered around the campus I hadn't visited in years. The students laughed and chatted energetically. I used to be one of them. Serafina, you're here. It's my fault you and Orion argued, Celeste sobbed. I hadn't even noticed her approach. She grabbed my sleeve, crying, looking pitiful. I'll stop bothering you. Someone like me is just a burden. I might as well be dead, she said, attempting to leap over the railing. Orion rushed to grab her, but his movement was so abrupt he knocked into me. My back slammed against the railing, and if I hadn't clung tightly, I might have fallen. Orion's eyes were red as he glared at me and comforted Celeste, apologizing and blaming me for ruining her life. Ignoring the sharp pain in my back, I smirked. Failing because you missed one class? You've skipped plenty of classes before, so don't pin this all on me. I won't take the blame. Orion's forehead tightened with anger. Serafina, this is my final warning. Apologize to Celeste and make it right. You have connections. You're 30 now, practically a single woman, and you want me to marry you, right? If you don't apologize, forget about marriage. My voice remained steady. That's fine with me. We've been together 6 years, and we're miserable. There's no reason to keep this going. Let's break up. Orion stared at me, stunned. You're joking, right? He sneered as if he'd figured something out. Oh, so this is a game? You're 30 and you still want to play hard to get? I'm not falling for it. I looked at him, a wave of irritation washing over me. Talking to him was draining. I'm serious. I'm not asking your opinion. I'm telling you. We're done, Orion. I turned to leave, but Orion grabbed my wrist, visibly frustrated. Serafina, my patience has limits. It's not very gentlemanly to hold a lady like that, a voice interrupted. A man with glasses stepped in, breaking Orion's grip and nodding politely. Nice to meet you, Serafina. I'm Quincy. Celeste, still teary-eyed, brightened up. Quincy, it's me. I had a real reason for missing class. Oren sighed in relief. So it's Quincy? Serafina, you're here to ask Quincy to help Celeste, right? At least you have some decency. Maybe I can forgive you. Quincy smiled politely. Sorry, but I'm off work now. Serafina is my blind date, so let's not waste time. Orion's face paled, then turned red with disbelief. What? She's your blind date? Serafina has a boyfriend. She wouldn't go on a blind date with you. He looked at me, panic in his eyes. He's joking, right? You love me too much to do this. I calmly nodded, and Quincy's right. We have a date. Now, if you'll excuse us. I took Quincy's arm, but Orion stepped in front of us. Wait, Serafina, how can you do this? We've been together for 6 years. I rubbed my temples, feeling exhausted. We're done, Orion. Celeste bit her lip, her voice small and manipulative. Serafina moves on so easily, doesn't she, Quincy? She's 30 and still knows how to wrap men around her finger. No wonder she's an executive. This wasn't the first time Celeste subtly blamed me, and I was too tired to argue. It was a good moment to see how Quincy would respond. His smile faded and his lips thinned. Celeste, you seem to enjoy making mean-spirited assumptions. Maybe you need a refresher in character. The working world isn't like school. Serafina is an executive at 30 because she's talented. You should stop speaking negatively about her. Quincy, usually gentle, rarely spoke so firmly. Celeste turned red, embarrassed, tears welling up again. Orion, unable to watch her cry, quickly stepped between them, his frustration directed at Quincy. Mr. Quincy, I respect you as a teacher, but you are out of line. Celeste is a good girl. She just struggles with communication. Failing her over one missed class shows you lack ethics. Honestly, your character seems even worse. Hearing this made my expression go cold. I've always held respect for educators, especially someone with Quincy's reputation. I was about to speak when Quincy shook his head slightly, his tone calm and steady. Who said she failed because of attendance? A quick investigation would show she was caught cheating during the exam. The department was informed that Celeste copied from a classmate's paper and then tried to deny it. With each word Quincy spoke, Celeste's face lost more color. She clung to Orion, tears streaming down her cheeks. It's not like that, Orion. Let me explain. But Orion looked stunned. Quincy and I exchanged a glance and walked away together. Behind us, Orion's anguished voice echoed, Serafina! Serafina, please don't go. I ignored him, not even bothering to look back. Quincy and I entered a restaurant, and I let him order first as a thank you. He accepted, and when the food arrived, I realized most of the dishes were my favorites. Surprised, I looked at Quincy, who met my gaze with a warm smile. He had asked my aunt about my preferences beforehand. A comforting warmth filled me. Orion once knew my tastes just as well, but that had changed. Clearing my throat, I turned to Quincy. I want to be honest with you. I have a past, and I just ended a long relationship. I'll tell you everything today, and it's up to you if you want to keep seeing me. My thoughts wandered back 4 years. At 26, while friends were marrying and having children, My parents worried about my love life. They constantly questioned me, but I brushed them off. My partner is still in school and education is important. These days, people marry later. My parents were anxious. He has time, but you're already 26, they'd say. I raised an eyebrow and smiled. So what? Your daughter can handle herself at 36. The next day, Orion came home with me, knelt in front of my parents, and said, Uncle, Aunt, Serafina is willing to wait for me. I promise never to let her down. I'll do my best to treat her right. He was so young then. My mom joked he was just a big boy, but my dad said he seemed mature. My parents finally approved of us. 6 months later, Orion struggled to find work. He considered returning to school, but his family couldn't afford it since he had two brothers. That usually cheerful boy was reduced to tears, looking like a lost puppy. My heart broke. I gritted my teeth and said, I'll support you. It's only a few $1,000s. I had just started working, so I covered both my expenses and his education. To make ends meet, I pushed myself to the limit. Working all day wasn't enough. I took side jobs too, surviving on 3 or 4 hours of sleep. My coworkers called me the hard-working girl. Orion appreciated my efforts and managed the housework, making dinner for me every night. Those were difficult days, but also our happiest. When I was too tired to stay awake, Orion would hold me and whisper tenderly, Serafina, you're the best thing in my life. I'll work hard so you can have a good future. I won't let you down. He often said, I'm just the overlooked middle child. Only Serafina loves me and supports my studies. Even when I was too exhausted to respond, I thought, you're my partner. If you want to study, I'll help. I won't let you regret it. But as Orion advanced in his studies, he grew colder. Conversations with him felt strained. Why do you always talk about your boring job? Am I just your emotional dumping ground? He'd ask. I walked on eggshells, trying to care for his feelings, but he continued pulling away. Serafina, I have my own life too. Don't you know how busy college can be? He'd say, his impatience clear. My heart ached, but I clung to our past, hoping things would change. Then, one day, I overheard him talking to his friends, and it hit me how quickly love fades. The boy who once adored me was gone. Orion had become a stranger. He said, I'm over her. But if I leave her now, everyone will criticize me. The first thing I did after returning was end things with my girlfriend. She's aging, and no amount of makeup can hide the fine lines at the corners of her eyes. Yet she stayed by my side for 6 years. If I left her now, who else would want her? Hearing this, Quincy shook his head slightly. That's not true, Miss Serafina. You're independent. You never belonged to him. In reality, he's the parasite who used you to rise and discarded you once you had nothing left to give. If the 18-year-old Orion knew he'd turn out this way, he'd beg you not to forgive him. Those words opened the floodgates, and years of suppressed pain flowed out in tears. Quincy silently patted my back, giving me space to let it all out. Once I had finished crying, I felt calmer. I took the tissues he offered and smiled gratefully. Thank you, Quincy. He smiled back warmly. Exactly. Once you leave the past behind, your future will shine. You're only 30, Serafina. Your journey is just beginning. Quincy walked me home, saying goodbye and planning our next meeting. At the building entrance, I noticed someone crouched down. I couldn't tell how long they'd been there. As I got closer, they looked up with a red nose, tired eyes, and a pitiful expression. It was Orion. Whenever he needs help, he pulls this act to make me feel sorry for him. I used to feel my heart shatter seeing him like this, but now I felt nothing. What are you doing here? I asked. His eyes turned even redder, and he sniffled, trying to hug me. Serafina, I'm sorry. I misunderstood you. I thought you'd come here since you didn't go home. This place was small and worn out. I rented it when I first started working. Later, after saving enough, I bought it. When Orion moved in, he joked about wanting a bigger place, so we upgraded, and this one sat empty. I stepped back, avoiding his embrace. The light in his eyes faded briefly, but he quickly regained composure. Serafina, let me explain. I only see Celeste as a sister. Nothing ever happened between us. I felt responsible for her, just like how you helped me back then. When I saw Celeste following me and calling me brother, it reminded me of my younger self. I shrugged slightly. That's fine. You can keep being her brother. Orion winced at my cold response, his voice desperate. I swear, if I ever had feelings for Celeste, may lightning strike me. As if on cue, lightning flashed, followed by a heavy downpour. His face went pale. I was anxious and didn't understand the situation before lashing out. I know I was wrong. Can you forgive me? He pointed toward a pile of gift boxes in the corner. Look, these are all the luxury gifts I promised you when I was 18. I finally have money now. I kept my word. I looked at his nervous, hopeful face, but felt nothing. Forcing a cold smile, I said, Orion, when you were 18, you gave me a gingerbread man. I was so happy I couldn't sleep, bragging to everyone that my boyfriend made it for me. My coworkers laughed, saying it wasn't valuable, but I told them it was the thought that mattered. Now you can give me luxury goods, but you've lost the heart that loved me. You won't give me gingerbread men anymore. These gifts won't make me happy. I continued, I don't blame you. People's hearts change. We can't go back, so please stop showing up in my life. Desperation filled his eyes. How many times do I have to say it? There's still a chance for us. I love you and I can make gingerbread men again. I looked at him calmly and shook my head. I don't love you anymore, Orion. You're 24 now. Stop acting like an 18-year-old, begging for forgiveness. You're so immature. His face went pale, eyes wide with disbelief, as if he didn't recognize me. Then his phone buzzed with a unique notification tone, the one he'd set for me. Standing in front of him, it was clear who the message was from. I smiled bitterly. Go to your high school crush, I said. I closed the door, taking a deep breath, finally saying goodbye to the 6 years of memories and feelings. When we first got together, I gathered all my courage to take a chance and faced everyone's judgment. In the end, I lost everything. I pulled the curtain shut. Just then, Quincy's WeChat message popped up. The weather's cooler now. I remember you caught a chill once. Drink some ginger soup before bed. I know you hate troubling people, so I made ginger milk powder for you. Just mix it with hot water. I couldn't deliver it today, so please make it yourself. Reading his message, the sadness faded. Quincy had a calming magic about him. I smiled and replied, As you wish, Quincy. After making a bowl of ginger soup, I fell into a deep sleep. In my dream, I saw 18-year-old Orion. He smiled that youthful smile that had once won me over, making me choose to stay by his side without hesitation. The younger Orion asked, Serafina, are you happy now? I paused, then nodded. Yeah, I'm doing well. Everything is back on track. He laughed louder, but a sadness lingered in his eyes. Serafina, just keep going forward. Don't forgive him. He lost you, so he doesn't have the right to find you again. I nodded, and slowly, his image faded away, becoming transparent until it vanished completely. When I woke up, dawn had arrived. The rain had lessened, though it still fell lightly. I opened the door and was startled to see Orion still kneeling there. His face was pale, almost gray, and his hair clung to his face with raindrops trickling down his neck. You didn't go to Celeste? I asked, surprised. He shook his head, his voice rough and strained. Serafina hasn't forgiven me. I can't face her yet. I let out a deep sigh and called for an ambulance. It was time to stop punishing myself. On we're over, and shattered glass can't be pieced back together. His eyes were filled with stubbornness. Why, Serafina? You love me so much. How can you just let go of 6 years? Is Quincy really that amazing? He started coughing painfully, his body trembling. Despite our bitter breakup, I couldn't just watch him collapse. I grabbed an umbrella, pulled him under the shelter, and went inside to get some fever medicine. When I returned with it, his face lit up with hope. Serafina, you still care about me, don't you? You brought me medicine, so there's still a chance, right? I shook my head resolutely. We can't be together, Orion. Did you think I wouldn't notice? Your social media background isn't my photo anymore, and you've blocked me. You and Celeste used those matching couple pictures, a panda and bamboo, thinking I wouldn't figure it out. I'm not stupid. I knew but didn't want to face it. I thought if you came back, I could pretend everything was fine. But you say I'm too old, 6 years older than you. You think I'm not as young or lively as Celeste? Did I suddenly age 6 years overnight? My questions left Orion speechless. His hand shook, and he couldn't even hold the bowl of medicine. He covered his face, crying bitterly. I'm sorry. I don't know why I said such cruel things. His apology was lost in the sound of the rain and swept away by the cold wind. We stood there in silence. Life returned to normal. Quincy and I chatted daily, spent weekends together, and our relationship grew stronger. One day, while waiting for him at the school entrance, I saw someone unexpected. Celeste looked worn out. The girl who once loved to dress up now seemed disheveled. She clutched a withdrawal notice, and when she spotted me, tears spilled from her eyes. Serafina, why is your life so perfect? You're 30, but everyone loves you. Orion, Quincy. I listened calmly. Everyone ages, Celeste. You're 18 now, but no one stays young forever. One day you'll be 32. Her face twisted with anger. So what? Even when I'm older, I'll still be 12 years younger than you. By then, you'll be a washed up woman in your 40s. I didn't bother to argue and just said, all right then. My words seemed to hit a wall, and her eyes burned with hatred. What did you say to Orion? He's ignoring me now? He deleted my contacts, stopped giving me money, and exposed my past. The school says I have poor character and wants me to leave. Are you satisfied? I was surprised. I hadn't expected Orion to turn on her, especially after how much he used to spoil her. Believe it or not, I didn't ask him to do anything. We're done. Celeste's face contorted in rage. Stop pretending to be innocent. You hate me. I deliberately got his attention. Do you really think he loved you? After 2 months of flirting, he was already close to me. Men always go for younger women. Quincy will eventually leave you too. I can't wait to see you get dumped again. I sighed, feeling nothing but pity. I don't need a man to live well, Celeste. I can take care of myself. Even Orion, the man you took from me, I supported him. Women become confident when they're financially independent. I earn my own money so I can choose to date or walk away. One failed relationship doesn't mean I lose the ability to love. Celeste stared at me, stunned by my words. I heard clapping coming from a dimly lit corner, and when I turned around, I saw Quincy approaching. He smiled warmly. It's been a while, hasn't it? This one's on me. Quincy naturally took my hand, then glanced at Celeste, who was still lingering nearby. Things are different now. You don't need to rely on a man to live, he said. 2 years passed, and Quincy and I grew even closer, eventually getting married. My parents were so overjoyed they couldn't sleep, and by dawn, they were already preparing my dowry. On the wedding day, I walked slowly towards Quincy in my bridal gown, surrounded by the joyful wishes of my loved ones. The ceremony was grand, with friends, family, and many of Quincy's students in attendance. To my surprise, Celeste also appeared. She awkwardly handed me a wedding gift, wished me happiness, and left quickly, not staying for the reception. Orion, however, stayed and joined in the celebration. When Quincy and I exchanged rings on stage, Orion raised his glass to me from a distance. Over the years, he had kept a low profile but stubbornly sent money to my digital wallet each month, calling it compensation. I clinked my glass with his. He seemed a little tipsy, his gaze vacant. Happy wedding, Serafina. Thank you, I replied. After a moment of hesitation, he asked, if it hadn't been for Quincy back then, would you... I cut him off with a laugh. Number. The 18-year-old you appeared in my dream and told me not to forgive you. His hand trembled slightly. After a long pause, he managed a bitter smile. I understand now. I failed you, and that's on me. After the wedding, my mom helped me sort through the gift money. When she opened a large red envelope, she gasped. There are words written here, she said. I looked closer and recognized the handwriting of someone from my past. The note read, I have no regrets, only the guilt of letting down the one I loved.